Hi, we're going to deploy Azure file share and we're going to map it to the Windows servers. So let's see how to do that. So before we get to the portal, let's take a look at this diagram which illustrates what we're going to do. So we're going to create two virtual machines, that's VM1 and VM2. We're also going to create a file share location, which is a file share server that the VM machines would be able to have access to. And then we're going to place the virtual machines within a subnet, which will be within the virtual network lab 24, as we can see here, and all this will be in the East US region. So let's go to the portal to see how to do that. So we're back on the Azure portal, and the first thing we need to do is to create the virtual machines. And to do that, we're going to use the Cloud Shell, and I'm going to have access to my GitHub repository, that is Azure commands, and I will go to bash, that's the bash command. Then I will go to deploy file share, and now we can see deploy file Azure file share and map to Windows servers. So these are the commands we're going to run, and the first one is to create the resource group, and I'm going to call my resource group lab 24, and location will be East US. So I'm going to deploy that on by running this bash command on create group.sh. So first of all, I need to download my Azure commands repository. So I'm going to click on that, and I would click on this HTTPS, copy that, and I'll come back here. Let me just create storage for my Cloud Shell, maximize that, and now I'm going to clone the repository. So I'll say git clone, and I'm going to paste that which I copied and enter. So I should have my repository clone, as we can see, Azure commands. So if I cd into that, that's change directory, and list again, I can see bash. So I'm going to change directory to bash, and I'm going to list again, and now we can see our deploy file share folder. So I'm going to cd into that, deploy file share and list, and we can see the various commands. So I'm going to first of all create my resource group by running the create group command. So bash create group.sh, and now it has created my resource group. And let me just confirm that AZ group, and let's order that in a table. And now we can see that we've successfully created the resource group. So next we need to come back to our repository, and let's go to deploy file share, and next we can see create the virtual network, and we're going to use the resource group we just created, and we'll create the virtual network lab 24, which is this one, and then we'll create the address prefix, that's the IP range for the virtual network, and then we'll create the my subnet, which is the subnet inside the virtual network, which is this, and then we'll create the IP range for the subnet, and all will be within the East US region as we have here. So I'm going to run this command, create virtual network. So I'm going to list again, and now I can see create vnet. So bash create vnet.sh. So it's creating the virtual network, and that has been done. And if we come back to all resources in our portal, let's go to resource group lab 24, and we'll refresh, and now we can see virtual network lab 24 has been created. So I'm going to come back here, in list. So next we need to create our VMs, VM1 and VM2. So virtual machine 1 will create in the same resource group. No wait, which means quick deployment. We'll call it VM1 in the same region, East US. We'll assign it to the virtual network, which we created, the VNet, and in the same subnet. And this time we are putting Windows operating system, that's for server 2016, inside the VM, and we're using standard B2S so that we have multiple cores for the Windows OS, and then we'll put our username and password. So I'm going to run that and create VM1. So I'm coming back here, we start again, and I'm going to run bash create VM1. Okay. So it's doing that, and it's currently creating it. I'm going to run the second one, which says the same thing, create the VM, same resource group, and this time the name is VM2, and the same if formation as the VM1. So I'll do that. Say bash create VM2, enter, and it's creating that. So it's currently creating our VMs. So I'm going to go back to the portal, and let me just make sure under resource groups we have RG Lab 24, and we can see the VM1 is created, and it's currently creating the VM2. So we refresh, and we'll just give it time to create VM2. But let me go to virtual machines, and we can see VM1 is currently being created, and very soon it will assign a public IP address to it. So we'll just wait a bit. And let's take note it has one disk, that's for the operating system disk, and refresh, and now we can see VM1 is completed with the public IP address, and VM2 with the public IP address. So next, what we're going to do is, before we create the file share location, we're going to create the disk, that's the data disk for VM1 and VM2, and we're going to put a file in there that we're going to eventually save in the file share location, and then from there they will be able to have access to the file share location. So let's do that. So first of all, I'm going to go into VM1, and let me just check networking to be sure that RDP is allowed, and we can see it set that up, allow RDP, and go back to overview, and I want to check the size, number of data disk we have, and currently we have none, but we have one OS disk which has our operating system in it, but no data disk. So we're going to create the data disk, and to do that we need to go to disk, and now we can see no data disk attached, and we can see the OS disk. So we'll click on create and attach a new disk, and we'll just call this data disk 1. Premium SSD is fine, size 32 gigabytes, and that's okay. Save. So successful. So now we have our data disk created, data disk 1. So we need to go and confirm, because here we still have nil, that's 0. So we need to go into the virtual machine to set it up so that the data disk can be seen. So we'll go to connect RDP and download, and we can open with remote desktop connection and connect, and I'll use more choices, and I'll put in the username we created, Azure admin, and the password, and OK. Yes. So we have access to our virtual machine 1 through RDP. So I'm going to close that, and I'll open the folder, that's the file explorer, and go to this PC. And now we can see that we only have the temporary storage and the OS disk. So we need to have the data disk which we created to show here. So we need to go to disk management. So we'll type in search disk, disk, then mg empty, and that's this, create and format hard disk partitions. So I'm saying OK to that, and we can see here our 32 gigabytes which we created, and now it says unallocated. So click on that, right click on that and say new simple volume. Click on new simple volume, next, and that's fine, next. F is fine, next, and next. And but let me go back and change the volume label, and I'm going to call that data disk VM1, next, finish. And if we look up here, we can see 32 gigabytes that has been assigned to data disk VM1. So if I minimize this and I go back to overview, and now we can see data disk 1. So we now have our data disk. So let me do that for VM2. I'm going to come back, virtual machines, VM2, and I'm going to create the disk first, and I'm going to create and attach new disk, and I'll call it data disk 1, name already, okay, 2 for our VM2, and the size 32 gigabytes, and save. And that has completed. But if I come back to overview, come to data disk, I'm still seeing 0, and you have the OS disk here. So I'm going to connect, that's RDP, and I'm going to run that too, connect, and Azure admin, and the password, okay, yes, and it's trying to have access to VM2, and open the folder as file explorer, and come to this PC, and we can see we need our data disk shown here. So I'm going to click on the disk manager, and I'm going to click on that, okay, and we can see 32 gig here unallocated. So right click, new simple volume, next, 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 and I'll call this data disk VM2. Next, finish, and we can see setting that here, and we can see it has created our data disk VM2. So I'm going to close that, and if we can see here, data disk VM2. So what I want to do is create a file in here for data disk VM2, and I'll just put a text document and just say VM2 text document and open it. I'll say this is a VM2 file and save, close, and let me minimize and go and do that for VM1. So back in VM1, so I'm going to click on that and create a file there. Say VM1, and I'll say this is from VM1. Save that. So I have VM1 file in the data disk and also VM2 in the data disk. So next I need to create this file share location or file share server. So I'm going to do that, and for that I need to create the new storage for that. So storage account, I'll type that, and remember this for our cloud share. So I'm going to create a new storage for that and call that in the resource group RGLab24. Storage account name, I'll say my file share storage, and ECUS fine, this is fine, and just make it locally redundant storage. Next, 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 create, and deployment is successful. Go to resource, and we can see my file share storage. So I'm going to go down to file shares for data storage file shares because I want to create a file share. So I'll click on create new file share, and I'm going to call this my file share, and let's make this hot. Instead of transaction optimized, I'll just make it hot since we're doing a test, and create. And now we have the my file share location, and we can see quota at 5 terabytes. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to connect that to my VMs. So I'll click connect, and now it says on Windows we need to use the storage account key, and we need to copy this, and we'll run it on PowerShell on the virtual machine. So I've copied all that, and I need to access my virtual machine. So I've already had RDP connection, so I'll go to VM1 and let's look for PowerShell, and click on that, and that's my PowerShell, and I'll paste that there, enter, and that's created. Let me close that and go back, and now we can see my file share server created here. Minimize, and let me open that of the VM2 and do the same thing. PowerShell, and I'm going to paste that, enter, and now it's connected to the file share location as the file share drive. So I should have it here if I go to this PC, and I can see it here. And if we open it, it's empty. But I'm going to come here and copy this file we have on our data disk and come to the file share location, and I'll paste it there. So we've pasted that file from VM2, and if I go back to my VM1 from here and I enter that location, I can now see the VM2 file in VM1 from our file share. This is a VM2 file. So let me do the same thing. I'm going to go to the VM1 data disk. I'll copy that and paste that in the file share. Paste VM1, and let me go back to VM2, and now we can see VM1 in VM2. This is from VM1. So we successfully created the file share for the two virtual machines, and we were able to create the data disk on both virtual machines, and we put a file in them, and we were able to transfer files between the virtual machines and the file share location.